Alright, so here we're going to get started with the actual 3D model of our concept. So we did the rough and we picked the final one we want to do, kind of developed it a little bit, and then in this stage we're going to make a proxy model of it, but we're also going to really further develop the concept. So we got the rough, which is the basic idea for what we're going to be moving forward with, but there's still a lot that needs to be fleshed out. So there's a lot of reasons for going into a 3D model at this stage in the concept process. And sometimes it makes a lot of sense to do it this way. Sometimes it doesn't make that much sense. So really you have to look at, again, what your goals are, what your timeline is, what the end product needs to look like. So for something like this, I'm going to do a lot more 3D modeling than I normally would. So this would be, for example, if I'm working on a film and the previs department wants to have a proxy model to start working with, and I know that they're going to need that. I know that the production designer is going to want both a front view and a back view, and maybe is kind of picky about how frames are shot or how images are framed. So making a 3D model, I'd be able to give him a bunch of different options. Do you want a low, big, extreme perspective kind of shot, or you want something from the robot's eye level, or whatever. So those are kind of some reasons why you might want to go all 3D with something like this. It also allows you to get real precise with the different shapes. You can get you can make something once. If it's symmetrical, then you can just mirror it. You can do symmetry, etc. So you're not having to draw crazy shapes and perspective, and you can just let the computer do the work for you. You can set up the lighting, that kind of stuff, and then when you render it out, you have a really good base to start from for your final image. And then you also have a proxy model, which you can be used for other things, for for animation, for previs, for animatics and games, whatever they may need. So I use I use potty modeling. It's very dirty. It's very messy. I use poly modeling pretty much exclusively when I'm doing this kind of stuff. I use 3D Studio Max just because coming from a background of video games, that's pretty much what the studios I've worked at have always used. These days I think more are using Maya, but I think most studios still use Max. But yeah, pretty much always start with a box, and just start pushing and pulling verts to make different shapes. So looking at the concept on my other monitor, I have the concept, the rough that was developed in the first chapter in this thing, and just kind of starting with the feet, just to show how I would do some kind of custom modeling of different pieces. And I'm not going to do this for the whole robot, but just to show you that sometimes you make things, sometimes you just grab from existing things, just to quickly get the shapes you need so you can render it out to paint over it. Again, speed is really important in all this stuff. So you can see, so I was starting with the robot. I'm just working on the feet, on the toes, and it's symmetrical on both sides. And then when you have shapes that are close to something else on another place on the robot, I'll do lots of times. I'll just grab different faces, pop them off of the object, duplicate them, whatever, and start modeling something. It's going to mirror it about the axis, so you want to make sure the axis is the middle of where you want that foot. So then whenever you make a change to one toe on one side, it's going to happen on the other side, so you can see here. And so that also really helps with getting some interesting shapes. So you can see there how the two toes, basically when they combine and they kind of are welded along that center axis, they become a new shape. So this is not like really clean modeling. This is quick and dirty stuff. You're not going to want to take any of this geometry and export it into a video game engine or anything like that. It's just quick. It's dirty. When you pass it off to a modeler or whatever, they probably won't be able to use too much of it. May be able to use some, but whatever they can use is a bonus. Whatever they can't use, oh well, they wouldn't have had it anyway if you didn't do it. So poly modeling is it's actually really fun to do, I think. Just taking forms, rough, blocky shapes, cutting them and extruding faces, scale. So here, I modeled the toes, and then this is a big part of how I work here. So what I did, I just imported basically a bunch of pieces that I've made, just random machinery, robot type parts, and I'm just going to kit bash. So kit bashing is, I think the term comes from the world of model making, where you basically take different pieces left over from models that you've done, and you make a new model out of those pieces that were never really meant to go together. So that's basically what I do for a lot of the robot design at this stage, because this isn't going to be final geometry or anything like that. So I'm just taking pieces and that I think would look cool, looking back at the rough model, and just pushing and pulling stuff and making rough forms. And it's kind of similar to when you're working in the roughs, just then kind of like you're just kind of playing with shapes, playing with forms, trying to keep in mind, again, anatomy and the basic kind of form themes that you have going on in your model. But you're just kind of filling up space. So right now I'm concentrating on kind of building from the inside out right now. So there's this inner kind of more detailed structure where little servos would be, and hydraulics and whatever kind of futuristic technology stuff would be inside of there, and then adding pieces on top of that. So you want to imply functionality when you're doing this stuff, with pistons and, like I said, servos and joints, and where the ankle is, you want to make sure you have something that looks like it can rotate. Where the knee is, you want to have something that looks like it can rotate. You want to have pieces that will fit into each other, so that even if it's not perfect at the concept stage, you want it to look like it could work. So then here, what I do after I have that rough kind of poly model down, you can see over there in the stack, so I add symmetry, and then I add a turbo smooth. Turbo smooth is awesome. It just, a lot of times you add a turbo smooth to something, low poly model, and some really cool shapes will just kind of appear that you didn't expect. And then you can always go back in and massage it. But turbo smooth basically just will it'll smooth out the geometry you have there. And you can set it to smooth based on smoothing groups that you set in your low poly under edit poly. And so sometimes, you can kind of control how the turbo smooth will smooth over the surface. And then you can also go back into your editable poly or editable mesh and add additional verts, add additional points if you want to kind of massage where the turbo smooth is going to go. So here's that kind of ankle piece I was talking about that it would need. Unless they say you can use the pieces, or it's free. So again here, depending on the end goal, a lot of times, so you really need to look at, each task you have really individually to see what's the best solution. So here I got some pistons, just putting them, attaching them up to where it looks like they make sense, so they could be able to move that foot around. So here I'm just grabbing some more pieces from my kit bashing selection I imported. I think I just merged it with the scene. So I think I'll probably use this as like maybe a knee piece, something like that. So you can tell also this has obviously been sped up. I don't work this fast. That would be sweet though if I did. So it's always a good idea to put pieces around the knees and ankles and joints that look like they are somehow involved with movement, with rotation. And then larger pieces like this, which kind of look like they might be a structural element. So again, here I'm just adding the symmetry, and you have to be careful to make. So you can see here, this is a way that I make a lot of different little shapes, cylindrical shapes. So this is maybe some hinge joint or something. So just selecting the outsides, number of polys around the outsides of that cylinder, and then just in Edit Poly you can grow or shrink your selection, and then just basically push it and pull at it, or doing a bevel or extrude, inset. All those types of editing poly tools are just really useful for this. And then again, once you add the Turbo Smooth on top, you get some cool shapes. And then you see the kind of orange lines there. That's a result of working with I think it's called showing the cage. So I'm not actually working with all the verts that are there in the model after the Turbo Smooth in the stack. So I went down to Editable Poly, and I'm just working with the number of verts that are in Editable Poly, but it's showing the result, the final result after the Turbo Smooth. So that's really nice to be able to do too. Working with all these pieces and adding Turbo Smooths to everything, you can get a pretty high poly count pretty quickly. So you just got to be careful about that. You don't need to put Turbo Smooth on everything, or if you do, you don't have to put that many subdivision levels on it. So you can see there I put it in isolation mode, which basically just, whatever you select, you can isolate it so that everything else in the screen goes away, so you can work on it, and then you just go out of isolation mode and everything comes back again. So it's just a nice way of getting rid of clutter in the screen without having to hide it and unhide it and go through and find every object in the scene, because especially even like right now I've got a ton of objects in the scene, and I'm not caring at all about naming any of them. I know a lot of technical artists that would not be happy with the way I'm modeling right now. I'm just trying to get it done quickly here. And I'm using scale on objects, which is also a no-no, especially in video game world. So a lot of times you'll export something and you'll have put scale on it. It'll show up in the engine in the game. It'll be like gigantic or tiny. You don't know what's going on. You have to reset the X-form and all that stuff. So this is not modeling for video games. So here I'm just kind of modeling the cover that's going to go over a lot of these inner workings behind it. Just pulling out. If you select an edge and then hit Shift and pull it out, it'll like extrude that edge. Then you can just kind of weld the verts back together there. Then I was just creating some geometry, creating polys inside, in between there. Saving again. It's a very good idea to save often, especially in Macs. Sometimes things get wacky or corrupt or whatever. It sucks to work on something and save it and then find out it's like a corrupt file or something like that, and you have some wacky geometry that's making it crash. So save often. Then you can also set up your auto backs in Macs, of course, to save for you every 5 minutes or whatever. So a lot of the geometry here, whenever you're going to use Turbo Smooth, you kind of want to make sure your geometry is somewhat clean, you know, so that it has, if mostly quads if possible. Just because when you smooth it, then you'll get predictable outcome. Whereas if you have, weird geometry or verts and kind of just weird edges, you'll get the smoothing will be odd. You'll have to go back in and fix it. Again, just because this is just quick and dirty stuff here, so you don't have to be too careful with that. And sometimes you get some mistakes that happen from the Turbo Smooth that actually turns out to be really cool shapes. So it's just experimenting. It's mostly about speed. So there, I put the Turbo Smooth on. You can see it's kind of coming along. So this guy, these shapes, these large kind of armor shapes, really going to help with this guy feeling, kind of more massive. Then I'm thinking I want to leave a lot of negative. It's nice a lot of times to get that contrast in a model. We talked about in the rough stage, just having the difference between the inner kind of workings, the mechanical stuff, and then the outer armor shells. And a lot of times if you kind of have more organic forms on the outside, contrasting maybe more mechanical, hard-edged things on the innards, it can be nice. Here I'm just creating some more geometry. A little too bulbous right now. After the Turbo Smooth, so I'll need to add some more verts to kind of tighten things up. So that's a little trick I do there. If you just extrude or chamfer a vert rather, it'll like split it into 3 verts, and then in the Turbo Smooth it kind of gives more weighting to that area, so you can make like a sharper corner, whatever. And then I went there into the edge mode, just selected some edges and chamfered those, and you can see now there's kind of a more crisp line there, where there's now two edges instead of just one. So we're starting to get an interesting shape here. Still need some massaging, but I don't want to spend too much time on it. So there, I just made a copy of that shape. Kind of just put a little armor piece back here, kind of covering maybe where the calf would be, covering the pistons and things like that. But again, that shape is located in a place where, going back to human anatomy and things like that, there's a calf muscle there. So if you give something that kind of hints at human anatomy, it usually works out really nice. So just pushing and pulling things to allow for space for the inner workings in there, so it doesn't collide. I'm trying to think a little bit about animation and how these things might actually move or be attached. It's easy to end up with a lot of kind of floating pieces when you do things this way, so trying to make geometry that looks like it might go in and attach somewhere, if you can do that quickly, it's a nice thing to do. But you can always do that in the Photoshop stage later on, but if it's easy to do in the modeling stage, might as well do it. So here we're going to add a little armor piece to cover up the heel, kind of hinted that heel form. This is basically, you saw just copying the same shape 3 times here. So here I'm just changing up the form a little bit more, make it a little bit more of a unique shape. Have it cover a little bit more of the back of the foot there. You know, like I talked about in the rough stage part of the video, yeah, I think it's pretty important on especially large robots to take the time and actually make a cool foot design. So it does add quite a bit, and a lot of times it's an area that gets focused on. You know, if the robot smashing a car or whatever, that's kind of at the human point of view. So it's worth putting in the time there. For the animator's sake, you don't want to have, you want to give them joints where they can work with, that they can animate, just so the more places that the thing can move and bend, the more they're going to be able to bring it to life. So here I'm just kind of massaging the shape some more. Trying to think about how these armor pieces work together. Once you start adding additional pieces, you probably want to go back and move around some of the other ones. Because you want the kind of composition of the outer shapes to work well together. It's kind of that, the inner workings versus the outer shapes thing. And then you have also the the overall profile silhouette to think about. So hopefully there's a couple of levels of interest when you're building these things. So here I just want to reset the pivot point of this thing. Yeah, this is a cool little shape. A little bit too much negative space in there, so I'm going to fill that up with this thing. I'm going to reset my pivot point, reset the X form. So now when I add the symmetry, it will mirror around about the is a cool thing. It's nice when you can do that. Again, it just adds variety. So I'm going to add this little shape in here. It's kind of a part of maybe an ankle rotation mechanism. And I'll use it up here. It's, I don't know, part of the knee mechanism, I guess. Just kind of seeing what works. So I'm going to use that same piece I used a number of times on the foot already, and I'll use that as the thigh armor piece. So I'm just isolating the object again. Saving. Back in isolation mode. So I don't have to try and look through all those kit bash parts. Just massaging the shape here. See there, as you pull it in towards the pivot point of the model, where the symmetry is, how it works there. So you want to make sure that the center of the object where it's supposed to mirror from is all the way to the pivot point, so that you don't get a seam or weird things when you add your turbo smooth. So you can see how the pieces look like they could kind of fit together, overlap some. So there's some movement that can happen in the different forms, so that maybe the knee and the thigh piece look like they could maybe fit into each other. The knee piece kind of looks like it has some room to slide over that shin piece. So I'm just changing the point at which the about which my scale was affecting the geometry there. So again, this is basically that same piece of geometry that I used 5 different times, just using it as a starting point, and then just pushing and pulling and adding pieces and seeing if it works. So eventually we're going to get to the point here where we have this guy basically modeled out, and I talked about reasons for using this approach and taking the time to actually model something out, doing a proxy, and another reason I don't think I really touched on is being able to play with the pose for the actual final image, and I'll do that later on. But that's a really big positive, especially again when you're working with different production designers or art directors who are kind of picky about that. Being able to put it in a certain pose and then push and pull pieces and scale things, and if they don't like one pose, you can quickly, rather than having to redraw a whole thing, you can just basically re-render it out. So that's really nice. You're able to give people options to kind of be more invested in the process, and that's always good. So you can see I'm kind of doing the same thing over and over again here, just massaging that base level editable poly level, and adding the symmetry and the turbo smooth, and going back and forth, and adding geometry, taking geometry away, looking at different angles. I'm not just doing it from the ortho views of front, side, whatever. I'm actually trying to rotate it, see it from different angles. Something may look really good from the front, and you turn it to the side and it looks terrible. So the more you can look at it from different angles, the better. So here I'm just gonna kind of add some mass to that upper part of the shin, maybe where that calf might be. Then also, it looks like it's a piece that could cover inner workings. So you can see you can up the iterations in there, tell it just to display the ISO lines, and then you don't actually see all the polys that you're working with. You can just play with the low poly version and see the results of the after the turbo smooth. It's really nice. So some of these shapes are kind of insectoid a little bit, pretty organic, but I think it can work if it's just stay consistent with it. Just massaging some of these, that large shin piece. Make it a little bit more interesting geometry. These are a little flat now, so let's make them a little taller. It's a good idea to make sure in your settings in Max that you have your number of undo levels set relatively high, just like in Photoshop. Because it stinks when you forget to, if you like do a fresh install or whatever, and you start messing with it and you forget that you didn't do that, and then you try and undo stuff, and you have to revert or just deal with whatever you've done. So that's always a good idea. So another thing that's nice about the way Max does the stack over here is that if you want to try something out, you can always go in above your whatever edit poly you're working in and add an additional edit poly, and then push and pull verts around. And then if you don't like how that turned out, you can just delete that edit poly from the stack, and it just goes back to the way it was, rather than dealing with all the undo stuff that I talked about before. Sometimes you do stuff in Max that you can't undo, and that really sucks too. I don't know, sometimes it seems unpredictable what those things are. So there, another thing I do a lot of times is add the shell modifier. And that just basically takes your geometry and adds thickness to it. So you can either add the thickness in the inner amount or the outer amount there, and just makes it so it's not, a thin poly all the way through, just like a face or a plane or whatever. And when you're doing things like armor, you want to have some thickness. Unless you're doing something that's supposed to be transparent, then a lot of times you'll want to not add the thickness. Maybe you'll just want to add a lip that implies thickness, but not actually have two planes of geometry that it has to calculate the transparency through both. That can mess things up sometimes. So this is just a ball joint. Just really easy to make this kind of thing. In Max, just making a sphere, and then selecting verts and extruding or selecting edges all the way around a ring and just extruding them, and it looks kind of like gears. And then if you do that and then select, say, the verts around the inside and just twist it, then it looks kind of like it's got a fan type thing. So here, just adding some, I don't know, cooling fans or something to the back of the hamstrings. He's got like a radiator back there or something. I don't know. These look cool. It's a good idea using for kit bashing, and use that a number of places throughout the model. When you go into your coloring stage in Photoshop, being able to make all of those bright red or all of those whatever, and so it can kind of be it's a repeating thing throughout the model that it can work well. Looks kind of realistic that way. A lot of parts are made that way, or machines where it's got a warning sign on it or something, so, and they're all red. So here I'm massaging this piece, just moving some things around. You can see I tried adding a symmetry modifier to it and was encountering something wacky here, so couldn't get it to do the symmetry around about where I wanted it to. So I'm just going back in and moving the thing around, making sure all the pieces are attached. Just trying to select everything. Oh, there's a piece. Alright. I think I got it all there. Oh, there's some needs to be attached, but those aren't important, so I'll probably just get rid of those. Those are from inside the piece. So here again, I'm just adjusting the pivot to a place where it will do nice symmetry. Put it in there. It just works out real nice with those other little shapes underneath it. Looks like a cylindrical shape kind of would just rest inside of there. So here's another kind of random machine part. Looks like maybe part of a helicopter or something. Helicopter blades. But it works. So with this piece, I'm not really doing the symmetry and stuff, just kind of placing it in there. So you can see then when I'm pulling from my kit bash grouping over there, I'm just making a copy. So that way I still have those pieces over there to pull from, because I use them a number of times in a model. So this leg is coming along. Some kind of neat stuff happening inside the workings there. I like this cylindrical piece here. I think those fins are working real nice back there. Right, the calf here. Some of this geometry in the back, you know, sometimes you wouldn't necessarily think to have the back of the mechanical thing like this. You can kind of plan on having, you know, different movements where those pieces get, you know, get sucked into the knee when the knee bends. The animators or whoever does the rigging will figure it out. They're geniuses. But the more motion you can have in these things, the better when they move. It definitely looks cool when, if you can have all these little gears and stuff moving when it walks, even when just standing still having the gears kind of twitch and like the thing's alive even when it's not moving. There's a little bit of a weird bump on that thigh, so I had to move some things around a little bit. I'm just gonna maybe fill up this space under that armor. I like these fins. Yeah, that's cool. That'll work nice because you can just get a little peek of them inside there. So there, we're grabbing my favorite piece again. That bad boy's doodads back there. Yeah. Just grabbed it from the heel instead. I think the model's a little, that shape's a little bit farther along, closer to what I'm thinking about. So you can see I've got soft selection on, so whatever I select, it kind of fades out around it. So it'll move the verts next to it just a little bit, and the ones next to that just even a little bit less. You can control the fall off and the curve of the fall off, all that stuff. In editable poly like this is that, you know, generally you have a lot less verts, so you don't need to use soft selection too much. Here I'm just kind of getting into nitty gritty a little, probably a little too much actually. You don't want to go overboard with it because it is just a concept, so you gotta try and do it as quick as possible, you know, but still, you know, if you can quickly make it clean geometry or so that it will render nice or smooth nice, that is positive. But sometimes it's easy to get carried away trying to do nice geometry. just kind of playing with the shapes again. Let's not use that same shape a number of times. I want to make sure it's unique enough from the other times I used it. That's looking kind of nice. Like it kind of works with the fins under there. So here, just grab another piston type shape, I think. Yeah, that'll work nice in there. Cool. So let's use that shape again down here. It's part of the whatever mechanism is moving the foot. Got the leg coming along pretty nice.